Do you enjoy walking? I do, not only because it's a healthy way of getting from point A to point B, but because when I walk, I can really focus on what is happening around me. When we drive, we have to focus on the road, right? When we ride by tram or by bus, our phone usually wins and gets our attention. When we walk, though, we can really observe our surroundings. But let's be honest, how many of us really think about those surroundings? I mean, beyond their appearance. The house we pass every day is just a house, right? That wall is a wall, and that statue is merely a statue. But what if we decide to break that perception, stop, and start asking the questions? What is that house? Does it have something to tell that I simply cannot see just by looking at it? Does it have a hidden story? And when we ask those questions, we quickly realize that everything in our world is not just the way it looks. Everything has a hidden story. And when we uncover those stories, not visible to us at the first sight, it will forever impact the way we perceive our surroundings and the way we behave towards them. To illustrate this point, let me take the example of the city where we are right now, the beautiful and historic city of Prague. I consider Prague to be a storybook of hidden stories. Everywhere you look, every house, every street, and every corner, there are stories waiting to be told. Even at places where you probably wouldn't expect it. I mean, would you expect an incredible story when you see this house? Well, this is a house in Prague 4, specifically in the neighborhood of Braník, and I walk past it on a regular basis, but I never thought too much of it. I never thought there was a reason to stop and think deeper about this house. But then one day, I learned about its story, and that story transformed the ordinary house into an extraordinary one. The thing is, while this house might look normal, its architect is very far from being that. Some of you might even know him. His name is Jan Kaplický. And he was one of the most famous Czech architects. Some of his notable works include the Selfridges building in Birmingham, the Media Center at Lord's Cricket Ground in London, or even the Enzo Ferrari Museum in Modena. But why he built all these famous structures abroad, he was not so lucky and successful in his home country. Even though he was behind the winning project for the new Czech National Library, nicknamed the Octopus, or the new concert hall in České Budějovice, nicknamed the Stingray, both of these structures never came to life, mostly due to the great bureaucratic and political pressures and hurdles against such revolutionary projects. And Kaplický's sudden death in 2009 made their future pretty clear. They would forever remain on the drawing board. So the only building that Kaplický managed to build in his country is the seemingly ordinary house in Prague 4, called Dvořákova Villa, which he managed to build and design just before he emigrated from Czechoslovakia in 1968. Don't get me wrong, this is still a well-built house. It is just very far away from what Kaplický was capable of doing in this country. So not only that this house reminds us of the brilliant Jan Kaplický, it also reminds us how bureaucratic and political pressures, hurdles, and disagreements ultimately prevent us from having some of the most revolutionary works that people from all over the world would surely admire. Now that you know what this house is about, it does not seem so ordinary, does it? That is the power of a hidden story. It can transform an ordinary place into an extraordinary one. But what if a place is already extraordinary, famous, and gets attention for how it looks? Are hidden stories in that way still relevant? Can they still transform the way we perceive an already special place? Well, to find the answer to that question, we have to look at some of the extraordinary buildings we have here in Prague. And there is a lot of them. No wonder it's often labeled as one of the most beautiful cities in the world. The historic Charles Bridge, the spectacular astronomical clock, or even the modern and unique dancing house. All of these structures attract millions of people from all over the world who visit Prague just to see them in real life and then take pictures of them or with them, such as in this kicking position. Sadly, most of the people consider and admire those buildings only for how they look today. But that is a shame, because their present form is only a short chapter from the book about their history. And you cannot tell what a book is about if you only read the last chapter. So when we read, uncover the chapters before, the stories of their past, it can indeed transform the way we connect with such extraordinary places. Do you remember the 3 extraordinary landmarks in Prague that I mentioned? I did not choose them randomly because they all have something in common. When you see them in their present form, you might feel amazed and happy. But if you would look up a specific chapter from their history, you could feel horrified and sad. Because instead of beautiful architecture, you would see ruins and despair. This is the Charles Bridge today. Magnificent, right? Well, this is the Charles Bridge in 1890, after devastating floods hit the city of Prague and nearly destroyed one of its most famous symbols. What about the astronomical clock? Did it not always look like this? Well, this is a picture of it from May 1945, when, during the Prague Uprising, a fire caused by German shelling severely damaged the astronomical clock. And then there is the dancing house, an architectural wonder, which, however, stands on a place with a very dark past. Because in February 1945, the same place looked like this. That was after the city of Prague was bombed by a couple of American bombers, which resulted in massive destruction all over the city, and about 700 people lost their lives. Many of them, including several children, exactly in this apartment building, which was so severely damaged, it had to be torn down in the 1960s, and then 30 years later, that empty place became a location for a new, modern building, which quickly became one of Prague's most famous symbols. Seeing the historic pictures of these landmarks could not only make us feel horrified and sad, but I also believe it can make us feel hopeful, since it reminds us that with time, we can overcome even the worst imaginable tragedies, and that one day we can transform ruins back into places that can tell new stories and be admired by people from all over the world, even to the point that their tragic past will one day become invisible. So the fact some stories are invisible is not necessarily a bad thing. It just shows us that our world has changed so much throughout history that it is simply impossible for all of the stories to be visible today. And the stories with historical significance that I mentioned here, they are just the tip of the iceberg. Because most of the stories do not have a national or international value, but rather a personal one. And there are a lot of personal stories around us because every single one of you has at least one place that can tell your story, a place that others would overlook. But to you, it holds the world of meaning. Maybe it's the place where you were born and raised. Maybe it's the place of your first kiss, or a place that you put blood, sweat, and tears into creating on your first job as a teenager. Since I already have a microphone on, I think it's the most practical if I am the one sharing one of my special places. And who's expecting the place of my first kiss? I have to disappoint you, because instead, I would like to show you this house. This is a house in a small village called Filipovka in the north of the Czech Republic, and it is special to me because this is where my beloved great-grandmother used to live. And yeah, this is me and my great-grandma. I know I was much cuter back then. We used to visit her only a couple times a year, but every single time we visited, it was so memorable. I remember playing around all day there together with my cousins, going mushroom picking, riding the tractor, celebrating family Christmas there, and then, of course, having the best imaginable home-cooked meals. So logically, this place, this house, has a very special place in my heart because it holds some of my dearest memories and stories. And of course, I'm just one of the many members of my family. My great-grandparents, their 5 children, the children's children, and so on, all have a strong connection to this house. So now you realize that even though this house doesn't have a Wikipedia page, it is very meaningful to a lot of people. And that is the case for every single house in our world. But the reason why I decided to talk about this house specifically is because the stories of my family do not paint the complete picture of what this house is about. When me and my grandpa would clean up the attic, we found the dates of when this house was built. It was 1836. But my great-grandparents moved into the house in 1946. So this house holds also over 100 years of stories of another family that lived there all the way up until the end of the Second World War. The family was German. And if you know anything about Czechoslovak history, then you know that after the war, about 2 to 3 million Germans living in Czechoslovakia were expelled from the country and had to leave everything behind, including their homes. And for the houses not to stay empty, Czechoslovaks were allowed to move into them. And that is how my great-grandparents moved into the house. A house which today not only holds nearly 200 years of family stories, but also acts as a reminder of one of the most controversial and darkest moments in Czechoslovak history, with which we still struggle today. So this house proves to us that a house is never just a house, because it is also a home, a memory, and sometimes even a vital piece of history. By now, I think we all understand that it is simply impossible to consider the places we see only for how they look. That is the power of uncovering hidden stories. It reveals to us that our world is much more complex and important than it appears to be. But now you might be wondering, Petr, how is it possible for us to uncover all of these hidden stories? Is it even humanly possible to stop at every single place and ask about its story? Well, the answer is no. We do not have the time and capacity to do that. We might cherry-pick few locations that are close to us, and I would recommend you do that, but it would be simply too challenging to stop and try to uncover all of those hidden stories. The thing is, we don't have to, because the real value of hidden stories is not in uncovering all of them. It is in the sole fact that they are there. That no matter what the places are and how they look like, you know for certain that they do have those stories and that they are special to someone. And when we realize this, our behavior towards our surroundings will change. If every place is special to someone, then it deserves our respect. If every place is the result of blood, sweat, and tears of generations before us, then it deserves our appreciation. And if every place is a vital piece of our history, then every place deserves our protection. Because by harming those places, we would not only be harming a piece of wood or concrete, we would also be shredding through the pages of our history. So when we start realizing this hidden value of our world, it will positively impact our behavior. And all of us will benefit from that. Because if we want our world to prosper in the future, we need to first respect, protect, and appreciate our past. Because only if we value and cherish the stories written 1,000 years ago, or even yesterday, then we will be able to write the best possible stories of tomorrow. Thank you very much.